Venerable monks and nuns and sisters and brothers in Dharma, good morning to everyone. We must be aware of the transitoriness of the time. The 6-day duration of a course on the Essence of Buddhist Philosophy began yesterday. One complete day passed away, and we are entering into the second day. This will also pass so quickly, and by this way we will complete the 6th day like a dream, and that's the way how the whole life goes away. That's why the Chidamawa, we are talking about the first school of philosophy, they do not accept the transitoriness as the concept offered by Madhyamikas and even Vijnanvads. They consider the threefold time, the past, the present, and the future, as exist by its own characteristics or by its own nature. So therefore there is a moment of present, and the present is different from the past and also different from the future. The Madhyamikas consider that the moment of arising and the moment of changing are not different. The cause which gives arising to a phenomenon, that very cause is the cause of changing, cause of decay. There need not a separate cause for decay or for changing. This is Madhyamika's viewpoint, and certain Vijnanvadas also agree to that. But the Vivashikas have a separate concept of time. They say the cause which gives arising to a phenomenon, like a pot, and it comes into being, and it stays the whole duration of its life, and then it decays, and the decay or this integration need a separate cause. That is not the cause of the arising in the beginning. So it's good. I think we should agree to this viewpoint so that we could have 90 years of life without changing, and then we go to death. So I just come to my mind, so I mentioned this about the concept of time of this basic school. So before entering into the subject, we must recollect and revisit what we have discussed and talked about yesterday. Otherwise, we may just forget and not connect with the today's discussion. Yesterday we discussed how Buddha began to teach to his disciples after attainment of enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, and he gave first sermon to his first 5 disciples, the Panchvargya Bhikkhu, 5 group of monks. He gave the teaching of Four Noble Truth. Four Noble Truth as a sequence of reality in which we lived, and also sequence of possibility how we can get out of the present situation and get freedom and liberation through a practice of a specific path, a specific way. So this teaching comes as a Four Noble Truth, and which makes a framework or a ground for entire Buddha's teaching, which later on developed. And the Vibhashikas and the Tarantikas, these 2 schools of thought, accepts only this is the turning of the wheel of Dharma. They do not accept 3 times turning of wheel of Dharma. That is a concept by Mahayanas, and they think this is the totality and the entire teaching of Buddha, and that's why they call it the turning of wheel, the Dhammacakra Parivatan. And thereafter, for 40 years, whatever the Buddha taught was explanatory or commentary on this first teaching. So therefore, from the viewpoint of Saravakyan or the Hinayanis, this teaching is most important, and also because it covers the entire Triyan teaching. Everything is included in this. Then thereafter we talk about the first truth of suffering, Dukha Arya Satya. Then we also talk about why it is called Arya Satya, the noble truth, not only simple truth, a noble truth. We discussed about that. And then finally we get into a little details of the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And during that discussion, we talk about the 8 different kind of pain or suffering as mentioned in the Dhammacakra Parivatan Sutta. And then we further added that those 8 are sum up in the 3 different kinds of suffering. And then we also discussed the importance of the understanding of the suffering as suffering, because the ordinary worldly people do mistake certain misery or pain as pleasure. So unless you see the reality, the nature of all pleasure, worldly pleasure, as either cause or either it's going to be changed, then it creates pain or misery. So we talk about the misery of changing, and then we talk about all the 5 aggregates of our being are nature of misery and also cause of misery, are the vessel in which the entire misery is remaining contained or put in. And because this is entirely depend on the force of karma and the defilement of mind, we have no control over, so therefore it is misery. So we discuss these things. Then thereafter we also discussed the second noble truth, that is the origin of the misery, pain, and that can be categorized in 2 categories. The force of karma. Karma means action. Each action has an immediate effect, immediate result, as well as that action creates a potential or energy which remains on our mind, the continuity of mind, and which carries so many lives together and then finally give result. So all the karmic actions have been originated or initiated by defilement, by the negative part of the mind, and the negative part of mind can be categorized into 3 or into 2 different groups. One is in the nature of hate, and the other is the nature of attachment. And the hate and attachment both come out of the ignorance, the not knowing the reality. So these 3 are the basic component of the entire mental defaultment. And then we did not dwell into many categories of the mental defaultments, considering that you might be aware of this or you can read them from tests. So basically the 3 category is sufficient if you understood this, and it covers the entirety of the default set of the mind. Then we also discussed very briefly how the 12 components of the interdependent origination, that means how the clash and the karmic force binds you in the cycle of birth, decay, death, rebirth, unceasingly, unendingly. We should have discussed it a bit more detail, but yesterday we are not able to do that because this is a common principle to all the 4 different schools. Of course, the detailed definition are different, but the 12 number and the names are all same. And that is the one of the important teachings of the Buddha, which is called Patitsamutpan, interdependently originated or arising. They are different translations. I think they are all same, whatever you may call it. So interdependent arising is one of the basic principles which Buddha have taught to the disciples 2500 years ago. India was full of different religious, philosophical and doctrine traditions, and not a single tradition talk about this principle. This principle is the most effective argument or reasoning to establish the void of an entirely independent entity which exists by its own nature. So this principle is accepted by all the four schools. Again, of course, their definitions are different. So, as I mentioned yesterday, and I am again repeating it, the interdependent origination has three different parts in it, or three different way of explaining it. The first is it deals only with the 12 part, Tendili Yangla Chunyi, the 12 portions of Patitsamutpan, which begins to the ignorance and which ends to the decay and death. So this is talking about particularly the way how we born in this world by the force of karma and by the conditions of the default mind, deluded mind, and then how we suffer. So this is one part of the explanation, or one part of the way to define Patitsamutpan. Then their second part of Patitsamutpan, the interdependent origination, is more pervasive. More pervasive means it does not deal only with a person, how he or she is born in this psychic, worldly psychic, over and over again due to a karmic force. So it deals with the entire phenomenon, the cause and effect principle. The Patitsamutpan, when it explains in the larger canvas, larger spectrum, then it deals with the entirety of the cause and effect. So the Buddhist way of looking to the phenomenon, or Buddhist worldview, is the entire universe is not created by some powerful person or by some external force or by anybody's will. So this came into being through the principle of causality. Any cause, any movement, or any flux which takes place, it has definitely a kind of reaction. The theory of action and reaction is very similar to this principle of causality. So anything which has a kind of movement or flexibility or changing, that definitely has a reaction, or is a effect, and that effect again becomes a cause for another kind of transitoriness or changing nature. So this covers the entirety of the phenomenon which we can think of, we can perceive, or we can image. So the entire goes that. And this second way of explaining of the causality, the Madhyamikas put it over entire phenomenon, whether it is composed or whether it's uncomposed. But the Vibhashikas and Siddhantikas, they apply this principle only the composed things, and they do not imply this principle on the uncomposed things or unchanging things, or things which are of permanent nature, which does not have any cause, which does not need any cause to come into being. So this is not covered in this concept of causality or concept of interdependent origination. The Madhyamikas think it further. It is not only a principle of causality, but it is a principle of connectivity, connectedness, or dependentness. Even the permanent things which does not have a cause, but that permanent thing is designated as a permanent or exists as a permanent thing, which are not going to change, yet the existence is of a projected by mind on the basis of certain elements. So therefore it is dependent to something else. If there is no transitoriness, then untransitoriness cannot exist. Untransitoriness is untransitoriness because in comparison or in relation with the transitoriness, we perceive it as a untransitoriness. So all things which we perceive or which we designate, they are all in relation with something. As for example, we say something, this is very big. If there's no small or there's no bigger, then we cannot designate anything as a big. Big is designated to anything in relationship, in comparison with smaller object than the object to which we designate as a big. So this kind of interrelatedness and interdependentness to make something as a cognizable in certain position or in certain existence. This all dependent on something else. So this is the Madhyamik way of looking the Pratitsamutpan. So then lastly we have discussed yesterday about the different schools are basically can come into existence on the different viewpoint, what is the reality and what is the illusion. Illusion about the ignorance. Ignorance is an illusion, and how the ignorance, the first portion of the 12-lingua Pratitsamutpad, in explaining that nature, then the different schools have been come up. So then finally yesterday we concluded with a question that do we ever inquired about our way of grasping as a self, as an individual, as a me or as a I. So this is the first step to getting into different schools of thought or different philosophical tenets or philosophical schools. So this question lead into the many different concepts and principles which developed in Buddhism and also in the other philosophical schools. They also basically dealing with the understanding of I or understanding of me. Now, the word in Tibetan language is Dak, and Sanskrit Aham or Atman, and I don't know English, only the self is used, or there are some other words also used for Dak. Only self is used. Is it so? Mm-hmm. And selflessness, Dameva. As we also discussed the 4 cardinal principles or 4 boundaries of Buddhist philosophy, so we have to accept there's no self. And now denying the existence of self, everybody afraid of getting into nihilism. Nihilism, Cheta, the Uchedvad, means you are not able to negate what is to be negated, but you have negated even the existence self. So that is nihilism. The English proverb, throwing away baby with the water, so that kind of transcending the limits of the negation of self. But this selflessness, Niratma, that shall have to be accepted by every Buddhist school. If you do not accept the Niratma, selfless, then you would be out of the for boundaries. All phenomena are empty and selfless. This is the very explicit word uttered by Buddha. Now, what is emptiness and what is selfless? These two are interpreted in many different ways. So, this is basic question. When we go into the Madhyamika school, then it will little easier, because then we differentiate what is exist, just name and designation, and what is exist but its own nature. The existence of its own nature is to be negated, and existence of nominal, existence of in name and designation, or existence just as the thought conceives or thought projects. So this much existence is accepted by Madhyamikas, and there we can differentiate more easily. And with the Vibhashikas and the Sutantikas, they do not have this kind of differentiation, how to exist in nominally. So you negate something, then you also tend to negate its existence in nominal, its existence in a just name and designation. That also tend to negate. So therefore, to recognize pinpointedly the nishedya, that means what is to be negated, the gaja, to recognize the gaja is the very key point when we talk about the philosophy, the darshan. Now, we also shall have to become familiar the selflessness of person and selflessness of phenomenon. The Dharma Niratma and the Putugal Niratma. The Sanskrit is Putugal Niratma and Dhamma Niratma. The Niratma is categorized in two groups, and in Tibetan language is Kansag Dhame, Chuch Dhame. Dhame is commonly accepted, but it is two groups. One is the selflessness of the all phenomenon other than the person, and the selflessness of the person. These two are important to differentiate, and on which all the philosophical schools are being built up. Now we are very strictly talking about the Vibhashika's position. I will not refer to other than Vibhashikas. Strictly in the Vibhashika's viewpoint, what kind of selflessness they talk about. And Vibhashikas do not use the expression, the phenomenal selflessness. They only use the expression selflessness of person. The Putugal Niratma is the only Niratma which the Vibhashika school talk about. And Dharam Niratma, they never use this expression. On the contrary, they think all the phenomenon other than the person, they do have the self, because they truly exist. They exist by their own nature or by their own characteristics. So therefore, there's no phenomenon selflessness. Phenomenon selflessness is not a subject of meditation. Only the person selflessness, the Putugal Niratma, is the subject of meditation, and the grasping on person's self is the ignorance which creates all the hate, attachment, and all kind of defilement of the mind. It comes out of the ignorance of the Putugal Niratma. The Putugal Niratma, the selflessness, or the person selflessness of person, has two categories. One is a gross level, and the other is a subtle level. The gross level person's selflessness is the negation of the self as projected by the Vedic school, the pre-Buddhist school of Indian tradition. As we mentioned briefly yesterday, they consider the self as a manifestation of a larger and a pervasive self, which is the creator of entire universe. And that kind of Atma must have, that kind of self must have three characteristics or three qualities, then only it is termed as self. The three qualities, the first is Papa, that means permanent, not transitory. It never changes, it always remains. And the second quality is singular. It cannot be divided. There's no plurality in it. It is always remain as a single entity. Their emphasis on single entity is to avoid diversity, because individuals are individual. To becoming an individual, the singularity, not duality, not divisiveness is considered to be necessary. And the third quality is of independence. It does not depend on anything. It exists there without in relationship anything, without depending on anything, and without, it cannot be even destroyed by any means. So this is entirely independent. So this is the pre-Buddhistic, non-Buddhist way of looking to the self, explanation of the self. So thereby, they say, since there is unchanging self, So there is a rebirth. There is an unchanging soul. There is the experience of the result of your deeds, your karma. And if there's no soul, then the concept of karma and karma's effect, birth and rebirth, all these principles cannot be established. So this is the Vedic argument. So this kind of self and negation of this kind of self is the gross level person's selflessness. I think it becomes a bit technical and dry. So anyhow, we have to deal with it. So now this kind of dancing, this kind of grasping on the self does not have in everybody's mind. This is only a grasping mind which is created by certain concepts and principles, and who have believe into certain philosophy, knowledge of certain philosophy, so they have this kind of grasping of the self. So that's why they call it gross. It is not the inbuilt grasping the self. Inbuilt grasping self does not know whether it is permanent or impermanent, does not know whether it is singular or plural, they does not know whether it is independent or interdependent. All these are concepts which are come out of certain philosophical tenets, and with education and with learning, they come familiar with these terms and with these details. So those who have entered into the school of non-Buddhist philosophical traditions, basically the followers of the Veda, who talk about a pervasive Atma, para-Atma, and then the individual Atma, Jiva Atma, and these are all permanent, singular, and independent, all these attributes put on. So that is easy to negate. And negation of Tachik Rawan Chenchida, I don't know how to put, can you help me? Tachik Rawan Chenchida Meva. So we have to, all these words, okay. Negation of permanent, singular, and independent, yes. The negation of permanent, singular, and independent I or self, that negation is one of the gross level selflessness. And by negating this, the designate self or nominally existent self need not to be go away with this. This is a very a qualified thing which is to be negated. And the grasping to this kind of self is also always, we call it quinta, I don't know what to be, but it is created by certain conceptual things, concepts. So this is one thing. Then the second thing, the subtle level of selflessness, and that is the real root cause of all the 11 links of the interdependent origination, is the grasping on a self which is a self which exists by its own nature, and which is tangible. Tangible is okay for zestruba. Kansa rangcha thub zei. Should I say zestruba or tangible or what? Some other material or substantial. Substantive and self-operating, rangchatova, self-operating, substantive, self-operating, and such self which we conceive or which we cling on, such vision, such view, that is inbuilt in unenlightened person. Everyone has this kind of grasping on the self. If you look to your mind carefully, you will feel that I don't think I should say feel. You have the kind of holding on certain existence of I. When person is hurt, one person is overjoyed, whenever such a strong and powerful feeling comes, then there is underneath a grasping of self which doesn't have any qualifications, or unqualifyingly you grasp on a very solid and very tangible self that's there, and that is need to be negated, and that is mostly, now I'm talking about according to the Vivashika. Later on, do not mix up. When we go to the Madhyamikas, there's something different. So, strictly in accordance with the Vivashikas. So, this kind of grasping is grasping a self which is separate from the 5 aggregates that you can experience. When we have feeling of ego, feeling of I very strongly, it does not feel my form is I. Neither it feel my feeling, my sensation, my consciousness, all the 5 aggregates on which a person is designated. Each one of the aggregates do not think or do not conceive this is I am. And we simply feel not depending on any one of these aggregates, nor part of any one of these aggregates. There is a separate, there is a kind of independent, solid self is being conceived by this misnotion, misconception, that is ignorance. Can you see it? Someone abuse you and you get immediately arising anger, and at that time a very strong feeling of I did not done anything wrong, but he or she abused me. So there is a grasping of I so strongly comes out. And at that moment we are not able to observe the grasping mind of I. If we are able to observe, then it really grasps, it really cling on something which is entirely separate from all the aggregates and the basis on which a person is constituted, a person is designated. So that need to be negated. The negation of such self is the subtle level of the subtle selflessness of the individual. So that is the selfless, that is the opponent or antidote of the ignorance. On that selfless you meditate. In the beginning you meditated with the thought process, and then slowly and gradually that thought process become a perception, direct perception, and that direct perception of such selflessness is the path through which you achieve the arahanthood. So I may say this kind of person selflessness, as I explain now, is the core of the philosophy of Vibhashikas. And then Vibhashikas has so many different ways of prescribing the phenomenon and the categories of Abhidhamma and way of practicing path. So these are quite a vast subject. I don't think we will able to go into everything. So coming back to the concept of selflessness in the Vibhashika school, then you need also the concept of the self, because the self is not negated completely. The negation of self which we talk is a substantive, self-operative, And as we mentioned before, not designated or not a part of anything of these 5 aggregates, and a separate such a misconception, so that is to be negated. And the way of negation is quite similar. So that is analyzing such a self or such a I. If you search it, if you look at the grasping mind, then it will automatically disappear. Such self does not exist there. Now what is self? Who experiences the results of the karma, who take birth and rebirth, who goes through practice of path, and who achieves the cessation of misery. There must be a self. And that self, in accordance with the Vibhashika, there are 2 different groups. The Kashmir Vibhashikas accept the composition or combination, tsopa, pombunga tsopa. Pombunga tsopa is combination or composition? What should I use? Combination, maybe. The combination of the 5 aggregates, when it comes together and it has a combination, it has a kind of identity or existence. 5 pencil put together and bind with a rubber bandage, and it will remain together. So the togetherness of the 5 elements is the self. And then how it transits from birth to birth, that's debatable, because the 4 aggregates are belonging to a mind, and 1 aggregate, the form, Such Pombo, is belonging to a gross physical structure. And this gross physical structure does not go from this life to the next life. And when this one component of the 5 aggregates is missing, then in between the transition from this life to next life, there's no person. So this is the acquisition or argument put forward by other set of the Vibhashikas. So according to the Mankur Vibhashika, who consider this combination of 5 aggregates as a person, they say even in the transition period, the intermediate period, still there is a form. It may be a subtle form, but form does not goes away. There is a subtle form which is not a gross one, but still there is all the five aggregates are intact. So thereby it goes from this life to next life, and there's no difficult to accepting this as self. The other session of the Vivashika says no, the self is only the continuum of the consciousness, the numbership June. Among the five, the fifth is the numbership Pumbo. Numbership is refers to the principal consciousness. If you divide the consciousness into 6 or 5 or 8, then principal consciousness becomes the numbership. And it has a continuum. It arises, it remains, it decay, but at the time of decay, its continuity, its stream does not break. The stream always goes in the next recreation. So this kind of continuum is the person, and therefore the death, intermediate, rebirth, all these are the person is continued, and therefore the karma and karmic result will never stop, and it goes continue like that. So this is considered to be a person. So I think that is a gross level discussion of how Vivashikas conceive the selflessness and the principle of Niratma. As I mentioned, they do not talk about Dharam Niratma, they only talk about person, Purtugal Niratma. They have argument because Atma, in accordance with the Sanskrit jargon, it only refers to a living thing. It doesn't refer to non-living beings. To the phenomenon, the Atma word is not easily applicable. But the Madhyamikas, of course, they use it for other than living beings, the entire phenomenon, they apply the concept of Dharam Niratma, because there the Atma does not refer to a kind of a living individual. There refers the essence of existence. So that's why the Dharam Niratma, the selflessness of the phenomenon, is also comes into subject of meditation. Having said that, now how the Vivashikas practice the path, and what is their concept of path and their concept of the nirvana or the salvation. So now we have a very important matter to discuss, that is the concept of ultimate three yans and the concept of ultimate one yan. This is a major difference between the Mayan tradition, Mayan concept, and the Charvakyan concepts. As I briefly mentioned yesterday, that Vivaskas and Siddhantikas are considered to be philosophical school belonging to Hinayan. A philosophical school need not to be classified in any particular yan, but there are certain concepts which is dealing with the yan explanation, yan principle, the principle of vehicle. The Vivaskas and the majority of the Siddhantikas, there are few categories of Siddhantikas are different, otherwise the majority of Siddhantikas, both of these two schools believe that ultimate end or ultimate objective are three different. They are not one. All these sentient beings do not have the potential to achieve Buddhahood. The entire sentient beings are basically or by nature in three different races, real race, family, yeah, maybe. There are some of the individuals are destined for only arahanthood, and then the others are destined for Pratik Buddhahood, and few of them have the potential or the seed of Buddha. Here I may use seed, maybe Gotra. Gotra is Gotra can be translated into seed. So every sentient being does not have the seed of attaining the Buddhahood. There are three different seeds in the human, in the sentient being's mind, intrinsically, by its own nature. So some of them goes up to arahanthood, Dachungbe Kuvan. The others goes to Pratik Buddha, the Ransanjay Kuvan, and few individuals has the seed to attend the Samek Sambudh, the Buddha nature. So the entire Vivaskas are in the group who are conceiving the ultimate goal are three different. So by practicing the meditation on self, individual or the person's selflessness, as we discussed now, and you achieve the direct perception of this selflessness, and that will eradicate the entire development of the mind, and your mind become entirely free from all the bondages of klesh and karma, and you achieve the arahanthood. And arahanthood means you get freedom from the ignorance, freedom from the all kind of negative minds, defilement entirety, and thereby, if you might have some reminiscence of karma which have not getting result, will not get any result, because the absence of the conditions or help of the defilement of mind. No kaleshas are there, so therefore you are free. But in which life you attained the arahanthood, your body is the reminiscence of the result of karma and klesha. So that is a contaminated one. And until you give up this body, you get into parinirvana, the end of the mind-body relationship. You have to carry this contaminated body. They think that even the Shakyamuni Buddha's body was the continuum of the body of the Prince Siddhartha, and therefore it can be injured, it can be sick, or it can be decay or getting old age. All these are with the body, and the body is not of a Buddha nature. So this is a Vibhashika's concept. When you enter into a death, then you are entering into the Hame Jinyandi Nir Avashesh Nirvan, what I should call Hame Nyande. Maybe, yeah, without remaining or reminiscence, something like that. Nirvana with reminder. Nirvana, residual state of liberation. There are 2-3 different expressions are used. The Lhamanyandi is nirvana without remainder, no residual state of liberation. So what is residual? Residual is only the form. Always remember, I'm talking Vibhashika's position. Don't miss up later on. As I mentioned before, your mind is free from all defilement, and your mind is free from even the seeds of the defilement, and your mind is free from entirety the influence of the ignorance, because you have a direct perception of the person's selflessness, the subtlest selflessness of the person, and through meditation you pass through the Sambar Marg, the Darshana Marg, and the Bhavana Marg, and you reach into normal learning Marg, and you achieved Arahant. Your mind is completely pure and free, but you have the reminiscence of the contaminated body which you carry before you are achieving the Arahanthood. So therefore you are still liberated with residues. And when you enter into the death, then you enter into the no-residue liberation. And at that time, the stream of consciousness is also ceased. So this is very peculiar kind of position. The entire Mayan tradition, the entire majority of the Buddhist tradition, they always think that the strain of mind cannot be come to the end. But Vivashikas and a certain group of Tantrikas who consider the ultimate goal as three different goals, they have to accept that when you have no desire, when you have no attachment, when you have no any wish, then why should this consciousness should remain? The consciousness remain because of its relation with the body, and it goes continue when you have the contamination of negative things, you have attachment or you have clinging on, then it goes the rebirth. Otherwise, if you are completely liberated and your body goes and you are the stream of the continuity of mind comes to end. So therefore your mind is completely ceased, the consciousness completely ceased, then there is no question of liberating again, no question of enter into the path of Bodhisattva and achievement of Buddha. So that's why the three final destinations of the individuals. This is a very peculiar position held by these two schools of thought, and the majority of the Hinayan followers. I think some of the Theravadins also accept this position, this principle of cessation of mind, cessation of consciousness. I was told that one of the very highly elevated meditator monk in Thailand who have saw Buddha as we portrait Buddha in our canon, he have saw it, then he changed his position that no, Buddha did not enter into a anavashesh nirvana. Buddha's mind stream did not ceased. Buddha still exists. If someone has the capacity or capability to see him, we can see him. So this kind of thing, there is a concept by Vivashika schools and a certain session of Stanti school. So this is one of the basic difference between the Paramityan and the Sharapyan. The Paramityan we talk about later also. It is one of the fundamental principles that the consciousness can never be disappear, can never be come to a cessation. It always, it has no beginning and it has no end. For that, a lot of arguments have been given, and this experiential as well. The entire Buddhist concepts and Buddhist tenets of philosophy are built on the basis of the acceptance of continuity of the self, continuity of the consciousness, and there is rebirth, there is a past birth, past life, present life, and future life. This is very basic thing. And on this basis, entire Buddha's teaching is came into being. And even the concept of cessation of mind after achieving the arahanthood, the liberation, then also until the liberation there is no possibility of cessation of consciousness. So therefore one thing is very clear, that if we deny the continuity of consciousness and deny the rebirth or deny the previous birth, then you cannot claim yourself as a Buddhist. You cannot understand the entire Buddha's teaching. So this is a very clear thing. I think all traditional Buddhists are aware of this. Then one of the Vibhashika's position, which make Vibhashikas very different from Vijnanavad and Madhyamika both, is their conception is that whatever exists, that need to be found when you analyze it. The technical term is tadun selve tsena nyeva. When you search what is the existence, then there must be something to be identified. So therefore they accept the existence of outer phenomena. Chirul tuntu tuba, what I should say, outer phenomena? Chidun? External objects, yeah, external objects thing. External objects, which is entirely denied by the Vijnanavad, they emphasize all external objects do exist. And external object existence means the objects are not exist due to the mindset, due to mental projection or due to mental force. In a Vijnanavad, they deny the external objects because all of these are come as a projection of mind. When mind ceases, the outer object also ceases. So this is Vijnanavad. So opposite to that, the Vibhashikas very much emphasize the existence of the external objects as its own nature. And therefore, they also talk about a subtlest particle which does not have a possibility of further division, and a subtlest time which does not have a possibility of devising further. You have any particular word? Do you change chame? Duiten chochi chameva. Partless particle. And time indivisible moment. The shortest time is indivisible moment, and the smallest article is a partless particle. So from the partless particle, it builds the gross forms, and from the indivisible moment, it builds the period of time. So this is their concept. This concept is also very unique, and the majority of the later Buddhists do not subscribe to this view. But I don't know why and how they reach to this conclusion for accepting certain principles which are difficult to defend when we argue with them. Then their concept of the two truths, the ultimate truth and the relative, relative truth is not very appropriate, I don't know. Anyhow, we use it, relative truth. And the Vivashika's position of this two truth is in a way, this is a transitory thing. When it decays, you cannot perceive the thing as it was. That is the relative truth. A thing which always remains in a same position, and when it changes or it alters, even you do not alter your mind, the recognition of the object remains the same. Such as a pot made of mud, and that is not an ultimate truth, because the mud-made pot is break into pieces, then the mind do not perceive it as a pot. The perception of pot doesn't remain, it goes away. So therefore this is just a temporary truth, relative truth. It can be destroyed, it can be changed. And such as the uncomposed space that always remain there, and there is no change of its perception in the mind, that is the ultimate truth. So this is their way of expressing the two truths. I think in the beginning, the Vivashikas, before the arising of Mayan principles, they may not have this kind of concepts. I think it is the encounter with the many other lately developed schools, then they may also coined this kind of concepts to make their own philosophy more complete. and more comprehensive. The Vibhashikas emphasize the study of Abhidhamma because Abhidhamma is the only thing which make the school different and unique. Otherwise, the Vinaya almost the same. The different schools do not have a different Vinaya. And also the way of meditation, the sutras, they also do not have much different. And Abhidhamma, that means the metaphysic categories, elaborating the existence of the entire phenomenon, the entire universe, that need to be established. So the Vibhashikas Abhidhamma, they categorize the entirety of the existing phenomena into 5 categories. Five categories. The first category is the uncomposed, non-composed phenomenon. Non-composed phenomenon as a permanent phenomenon. That is one of the categories. And the second category is the appearance as a form or objects of the perception, in which most of the composed phenomenon, I think perhaps the entirety of the composed phenomenon, and which includes the form, the color, the sound, the smell, the taste, and all the objects of the sensory mind. These are the appearance as a form, as object perception. And the third is about the principal mind or the prime mind, primary mind. Principal mind, Tsosen, or primary mind, I don't know, but many people translated it as a primary mind. But they divided into the entire consciousness are divided into one basic mind and the other mind which comes around that basic mind. So the fourth is secondary mind or the subsidiary mind. If we call for the Tsosim as a principal mind, then the Sinjung may be termed as subsidiary mind. If we use the term for the Tsosim, primary mind, then Sinjung, I think, is secondary mind, whatever it may be. Then the fifth is no associated compositional factor. This was, I brought, somebody has used this. It is for the Demba Maimbe Duje. Demba Maimbe Duje, it is a composite thing, transitory thing, but it does not belong into the category of form. It does not have a form, and it does not associate with the form, yet it has an existence. So this is their outline of the, what I should say, their outline of the Abhidhamma, the metaphysic details of the Vivashika Abhidhamma. Vivashika Abhidhamma is so extensive, and it is much closer, the Abhidhamma available at this moment by the Theravadin people, Abhidhamma Tisango and Vishuddhamarg, which deals quite extensively with these 5 different categories, and she is much larger than the Abhidhamma we study in Tibet. In Tibet we study only the Abhidhamma Kosha. Abhidhamma Kosha is a mixture of Vivashikas and Sutantrikas, not exclusively Vivashikas. So I think we have discussed most of the principles which belong into Vivashika school, and Vivashika school emphasize only the person selflessness, and that is the two groups, the subtle selflessness of person and the gross selflessness of person. And the gross selflessness person, you may meditate, but it will not get you at the stage of liberation. To get up to the arahanthood or state of liberation, you have to meditate on the subtle person selflessness. This is negation of a self which is independently and self-operatively exist, not a part or not one of the 5 categories, and it exists entirely different or entirely separate of the 5 aggregates. That kind of self is to be negated, and by negation of such self and meditation of such selflessness, not only this selflessness, there are 16 different aspects of the Four Noble Truths, which we are have not time to discuss yesterday, and perhaps we may not able to discuss again. But they all are the object of meditation, and by meditating on these subjects, they can get up to the liberation of arahanthood. And after getting arahanthood, they remain for a certain period of time until their body is disintegrated. Once the body is disintegrated, then they enter into no residual liberation or no residual freedom, where the stream of consciousness also completely ceased or disappeared, and then the individual does not exist. The liberated individual does not exist. The liberated individual exists only as long as the individual carries the body which he carried before liberation. So there are 2 different stages of the liberations. All the arahants we talk about, like Venerable Sariputra, Mongolian, Mahakashyap, all these were achieved arahanthood, and they remain as arahantas, as liberated persons, until they passed away. When they passed away, their stream of consciousness, their continuum of consciousness completely ceased. And this principle applies to the Buddha as well. Siddhartha, a unliberated person, bondage person, has a body. That body is vipak of, vipak is Sanskrit word, this direct result of karmic force and kaleshas, which do have with Siddharth's consciousness. When Siddharth's consciousness liberated under the Buddha tree in Bodh Gaya, then Buddha as a person become liberated, not only liberated, become a Samek Sambuddha, entirely evolved person, the ultimate liberated person, but still he has the contaminated body which was given to him by the Siddhartha, and it can be hurt, it can be injured, it can be sick. So when finally Buddha passed away at Kushinagar at the age of 80, then his body was cremated, apparently. So at that time, then Buddha entered into no residual state of liberation of Buddhahood. Then Buddha consciousness does not continue after that. So that is the terminology, I think, which is more suitable to the Vibhashikas and Stantikas who consider the cessation of consciousness. They term it Mahaparinirvana. The death of Buddha or death of any enlightened person is called Mahaparinirvana, the great going beyond. The greatest going beyond. The going beyond means completely ceased. Nothing remains there. So this is very peculiar and a strange concept, but still there was such a school. So I think we shall consider we have done with the Vibhashika school, whether you have some idea or not. As a matter of fact, in Tibet, there was no scholar or no individual who claims himself or herself as Vibhashikas or as Tantikas or as Vijnanvadin. So we do not have much authentic information about these schools. Whatever we are talking about is coming from the literature, the treatises, the commentaries. A recent great scholar from Amdo, Kondhan Tembe Dumi. Kondhan Tembe Dumi wrote very extensively, and he wrote a praise poetry to Tsongkhapa, and there's very famous Tibetan-dema, and where he mentions that Payul Kenam Surnempe Ranglu Topshin to Tanzing, then a Tamje Omenlam Nyajan Lui Ma Jobes. The Indian people are more honest, so therefore they claim themselves a school of thought, a school of philosophy, which is really suited to their mind. If somebody is comfortable with Vibhashika school, they would say, I am a Vibhashika, I am a Stantika, I am a Vijnanvadi. So he live in that school and he practice that school, therefore he or she can be an authentic person of that school. The Tibetan people always go for the highest one. So everybody claims to be a Madhyamika. And sometimes the mind is not capable of digesting the Madhyamic philosophy, but still they just claiming that I am absolutely a Madhyamika. So for Tantri schools also, everybody goes for the Anuttara Tantra. No one remains on the lower Tantras. So this is the Tibetan way of approach. The highest is always choosing. But I would repeat what I have said yesterday, that all the four schools are coming from Buddha's original teaching, and each one of the concepts, principles, positions have a reference taught by Buddha's own words and practiced by the disciples, and which lead them to understanding of the higher and higher and higher philosophical positions. And we also, if we able to study all the schools more thoroughly, then there might be suitability to one's own mind. For example, when I study Madhyamik treatises, the Sautrantic Madhyamik position is much more acceptable to me. I can identify myself with their positions, but when it goes in the Prasangika, I find at many places very difficult to understand, to digest, and to identify with them. So each one of individuals might have its own capacity, liking, disliking, easy, difficult to different schools. So therefore it is worthwhile to study those different philosophical schools if we have time and energy to study them. Somebody reads in Tibetan language, then of course there are many books which give brief introductory statements of all the four philosophical schools, and among them one is written by Thukwen Chujnyama, that is very easy to understand, and if you need a little bit more elaborate and more subtle, then the Changcha Rinpoche's writing, Chancha Trutha, that's also very good. And then much more elaborated is Kunchen Jayam Shiva. It is called the Great Trutha Chimo, and it has one root test and then a commentary test. So in this great detail, the different schools' concepts and perceptions are being given. So today we have until now discussed what kind of selflessness of person is being considered by the Vibhashikas, and then by that selflessness, the Niratma, and how they will achieve the ultimate goals, either Arahant or Patik Buddha or Buddha. Then we also discussed what are the other concepts of the Vibhashika, apart from the ultimate three goals, and the cessation of consciousness when liberated ones are entered into a no residual state of liberation, and then how they categorize all their metaphysical things into 5 categories. This much we have discussed this morning session. And then this afternoon we will see how to proceed, and now we shall enter into the positions of Sutantika, and the Sutantika concepts are not much different from the Vibhashika. So Sutantika can be discussed in a shorter period of time, and then we will go into the Vijnanabad, the Chitmatrata. That is very complicated one. So this is 12:30. In accordance to my watch, I don't know whether it's authentic or not. So, so we shall stop here. Thank you.